Well, I am excited to share with you all lessons learned in the journey becoming a superhero pastor. And it's not something that I come up with for myself, although I did bring my revelation of my superhero-ness, as one should. But so many people read my blogs or come to my worship services and have heard of me beforehand. The first time that they're meeting me typically isn't in a church service or on the street. It's because they've read in the papers that I was one of the out gay and lesbian pastors, or more recently that I was installed as the first openly trans pastor to be serving a church solo in the Lutheran Church. And so oftentimes people have a lot of assumptions about me. They watch Bible study that doesn't suck, and they think, that Pastor Megan is just spending all of their time studying and preaching and teaching. And people often put me on a pedestal that is not a pedestal of my own choosing. I think I spend most of my day trying to get off the pedestal because I know how far you can fall when people put you on a pedestal. But just for now, just for this talk, I'm going to embrace that idea of being a superhero pastor because I think there's some lessons in it that we can learn for our entire faith lives and for other pastors who are out there doing interesting work. One of the things that comes along with being a pastor who is vulnerable, whether it is because you are honest about your health limitations or your disability limitations, or your sexuality is up for vote amongst council members or synods, is that there is this feeling that everything you do is being watched by everyone. And it's similar, I think, to what people talk about when they think about pastors who are living in small towns. It used to be that way that a pastor would feel really self-conscious when they were going to the store to drink alcohol because they thought everyone was watching. I've heard stories of previous pastors who served Grace where I'm at, and they would say, be careful, pastor, if you move to our neighborhood, because we used to hear reports about what people could see through the front window of the pastor's house. So maybe it's a little bit similar to what life is like in a small town, but what I've kind of more worried about is being someone who is a minority amongst pastors, and particularly having a role that people are studying and voting about. There's this sense that if you screw it up, it's going to affect policy change, right? That if you're not the world's greatest pastor, that other people are never going to vote to have a transgender pastor, or to have a gay and lesbian pastor, or to have a female pastor. Some female pastors may relate to this if they're the first one called in their congregation. Sometimes people can feel this way about whatever identity label it is that they have for themselves, whether it's being disabled, or being the only person in the congregation in a wheelchair, being the only person who can't eat wheat, and you feel like the whole church has to change the way they do things for you. And that certainly comes with some unhelpful baggage. It comes with some consequences that I wish would change, and I think as we move closer and closer towards justice and to a kinder, more welcoming church, we'll see some of those things. But today I want to share some of the lessons that I think have been helpful and make me a better pastor and a better person of faith. The first one is that if your sense is that how great you are as a pastor is going to make it possible for other people like you to be called in the future, and you do all of these amazing programs and you're working all of these hours to get things done, it can be a fantastic thing if you're successful, right? It's only fun to be a superhero pastor if you're able to rescue the church or to save things. And the difficulty in that position is I don't think there's very many comic books where the superhero is the one who gets rescued. I don't recall there being a story of Superman going on vacation so that he doesn't burn out. There's this expectation that your energy is limitless. And there's even, I think, a fear amongst some people that if you show that you're good at stuff, you will have to do it forever. right? If you're good at carrying the heavy boxes, you're the only one in the congregation who's going to carry the heavy boxes. If you're good at the paperwork and you're good at being treasurer, you're going to be elected treasurer for the next 20 years of your life. So wrestling with how scary it can feel to be successful is probably the first thing that people need to really feel comfortable with. I think the fear that you can have that if the church is overflowing, we're not going to be able to manage the changes that happen can be a very scary thing. One of the things that has been hard for some of my other colleagues, and is at least thematically hard if you believe sitcoms and television shows, is the attention to liability issues and laws. It's not the most fun thing. And sometimes the person on the council who's the one who wants to know all the wording in the insurance policy is the one who people think is annoying and just making the meeting go on too long. But there is, I think, a limit to how much good evangelism you can do in the world. That if you are nervous that someone's going to notice that your kitchen isn't properly updated enough to be able to meet the Department of Public Health codes, you have a limit of how much you can do that gets you attention, right? You will have to worry if the newspaper comes to take pictures about how great your meal program is, if they might accidentally get a picture in the paper of your kitchen that's not up to date. So knowing public health code laws, knowing liability laws, making sure you're keeping a diary that reports when there are incidents in your church, firing people when they're not getting their actual job done, and making sure that you have people who are overseeing the space, getting your documents in order. It's not fun work. It's the reason I have my first new gray hair. But it's work that you can't do any of the that you can't pick it, you can't do something so amazing that everyone's going to come inside of your church if you have to worry about the fact that one person might bring a lawsuit against you. And that's one of the things that has, I think, been something that people might not know about the gay and lesbian pastors who have come up the ranks and been known as very charismatic people, is that in order to be able to go out and go to synod assemblies and to rabble-rouse in the ways that we did, we had to make sure that we were paying all of our bills, that we were able to pass background checks and psychological examinations, that we were able to live a life beyond reproach, that thing that pastors are asked to do in their ordination vows and in their installation vows and in phone calls from bishops. It truly was a life beyond reproach when you live a ministry that is being witnessed by people. And I think as our attempt to be on social ministry expands, it's something that our transparency has to be even more important. On the flip side of that, some of my favorite verses in the Bible, particularly from the Gospel of Mark, are the times when Jesus is discovered how amazing he is, and he has to run away. So in the book of Mark, the crowds are so big that Jesus has to let the people line up to listen to him on the shore, and he gets in a boat, and he takes a little bit off the shore, and he's doing his speaking from the middle of the boat. Perhaps it's so a crowd can't crush him. Perhaps it's so he can make a fast exit at the end of the sermon. Perhaps it's because people keep touching him and trying to take his power away in the Gospel of Mark. Like the woman who's bleeding for a really long time, touches Jesus and takes his power, and he has to flee. But I like the idea that even Jesus had to go on vacation. The story of the Syrophoenician woman, the woman who's begging to get her daughter taken care of, is the story of a woman who encounters Jesus, at least in the Gospel of Mark, while Jesus is hiding under a bed. At least that's my imagination of the story. He's hiding so that no one will find him. He's in an area where people who have the similar faith as him would not be looking for him. He should not be in that country. And I imagine her pulling him out from under the bed by his toes to get her daughter cared for. Jesus is a good example of someone who burns out, right? His story of agitation leads to a cross. It leads to a gruesome death. Sure, there's an Easter after, but there is no sort of resurrection story that comes from pastors not taking their vacations, not taking care of their bodies and going to the dentist when they need to, not finding ways to have good self-care in their lives. And this means, church councils, that you have to fund their insurance packages. You have to give them time off to go on vacation, and you have to not pull them back by their toes while they're off doing self-care activities. It's an interesting thing to be a pastor who started ministry being ordained extraordinarily. Not very many pastors try to go from being an extraordinary pastor to an ordinary one. Right? Most people are headed in the opposite direction. They feel like they're ordinary from their own self-doubt, and they want to be amazing so that other people notice, so that bishops are happy with them, so their councils can be very satisfied, so they can continue to get their paycheck, and because it just feels good to do a good job. And then, of course, there's that business of wanting to follow God's call and do a good job with the gifts and the resources that we have. As we become extraordinary in our ministries, let us bring the ordinary bits of our lives so that we can be loved and cared for, so that we're not always standing on a little limb like Zacchaeus up in the tree, that we climb down and we're refreshed by God in our eating and in our worship. So my hope for our church and for the world, for those gathered here and for those who are watching online, is that you will find ways to reveal your superhero-ness, that those things that you can actually admit you're good at can be the things that you celebrate more often than your brain reminds you of the things you're not good at. Because I think the distance between where we are as a church and where we want to be will be traveled only if we stop talking ourselves out of trying and possibly failing. The gift of being a superhero pastor, sort of on the outskirts, is that you're not expected to get it right all the time. You're expected to be weird and different, and that's a part of why it works. So give your pastors hugs. Don't bring up when they failed at something, and tell them much more often when they did a great job. Because together, we can have a heart that beats for ministry.